Snow fell hard that morning as Officer Daniel spotted a young girl sitting alone on a frozen sidewalk, clutching a German shepherd wrapped in an old blanket. A cardboard sign hung from the dog's neck, $5 for sale. But it wasn't the sign that stopped the officer in his tracks. It was what she was selling, a retired police dog, her father's partner. When the off-duty officer approached, the girl looked up, her eyes red from crying. "Sir, can you buy my dad's retired police dog? Please." The officer froze. Something wasn't right. "Sweetheart, why are you selling your father's dog?" he asked softly. "My dad, he's gone," she whispered, "and I don't have any money to save him." Her answer shattered him. What happened next shocked everyone. Before we start, make sure to hit like and subscribe. And really, I'm curious, where are you watching from? Drop your country name in the comments. I love seeing how far our stories travel. The winter morning had a sharpness to it that cut straight through Officer Daniel Hayes's uniform. Snow drifted down in slow, heavy flakes, covering the quiet streets in a blanket of white that made every sound softer, every movement slower. It was the kind of cold that demanded silence, the kind of cold that made people stay indoors unless they had no other choice. Patrol shifts on mornings like this were usually uneventful. Empty sidewalks, locked shops, a world buried under frost. Yet Daniel didn't mind. He'd always found a strange peace in the early hours, especially when the city was calm. The hum of the patrol car heater, the crunch of snow beneath his boots, the way his breath rose in thin clouds, it reminded him that despite everything he'd seen as an officer, the world still had quiet mornings waiting for him. Moments where he could breathe, reflect, and simply be human. He sipped lukewarm coffee from the metal cup beside him and glanced out the window. Christmas decorations from last week still hung on light poles, some partially buried in snow. A child's forgotten mitten sat on the sidewalk, frozen stiff. Somewhere in the distance, a snowplow rumbled like a tired giant clearing its path. Daniel tightened his gloves and began his usual patrol down Oak Ridge Avenue, a route he'd walked for years. He greeted the few shop owners shoveling snow, checked the local pharmacy's back entrance, then continued down toward the old park fence. Most days, it was routine, predictable, safe. But today, something felt different. Maybe it was the silence, too deep, too still, or the way the wind seemed to carry a faint tremor, like it was trying to deliver a warning. Daniel couldn't pinpoint it, but his instincts, honed through years of service, pricked at the edges of his awareness. He slowed his steps, scanning the area with the trained calmness of a man who'd learned to trust the smallest signs. A dog barked in the distance, then suddenly stopped. A gust of wind swept across the street, sending a swirl of snowflakes dancing around him. Then he saw it. Far down the long, empty sidewalk, just beyond the black iron fence of Riverside Park, a tiny shape sat hunched in the snow. Too small to be an adult, too still to be safe. Daniel squinted, heartbeat picking up. A child sitting alone, unmoving, on a freezing winter morning? His breath caught as he took another step. Something was very, very wrong, and he knew his quiet morning was about to end. Daniel's footsteps grew quicker as the shape in the snow sharpened into focus. The wind pushed against him, tugging at his uniform, but his eyes never left the small figure huddled beside the iron fence. As he moved closer, details began to emerge. Frail shoulders, trembling hands, a thin dress far too light for a morning this cold. Snow clung to her hair and sleeves like frost on fragile branches. Then he saw the dog. A large German shepherd sat pressed tightly against the girl's side. His body curved protectively around her. His fur was dusted with snow, but his posture was alert, ears raised, eyes sharp, watching Daniel's every move. This wasn't the posture of a stray or pet left outside. This was a trained dog, disciplined, focused, the kind that recognized danger before anyone else did. But what made Daniel's breath hitch wasn't the dog's stance. It was the cardboard sign hanging from a thin string around the dog's neck. $5 for sale. $5. A trained German Shepherd, in the snow, with a child. Daniel felt something heavy grip his chest. He approached slowly, careful not to startle them. "Hey, sweetheart," he said gently, lowering his voice. "Are you okay out here? It's freezing." The girl lifted her head. That single motion broke him. Her eyes were red and swollen from crying. Her cheeks were raw from the icy wind. She looked no older than 9, maybe 10, but her expression carried a weight no child should ever know. Fear, exhaustion, and something worse. Surrender. The dog shifted slightly, pressing closer to her as if sensing her fear. His tail remained still, but there was no aggression in his eyes, only loyalty. Fierce, unwavering loyalty. Daniel stopped a few feet away, kneeling down so he wouldn't tower over them. "My name is Daniel," he said softly. "I'm a police officer. I just want to make sure you're all right." She didn't speak at first. Her lips trembled from the cold. Her fingers clung to the dog's fur like it was the only thing keeping her anchored to the world. Finally, she whispered, her voice thin and brittle. I'm fine, sir." But everything about her said otherwise. Daniel glanced at the dog again. Clean coat, strong build, intelligent eyes. This wasn't a family pet. It was unmistakable. A retired K9. He'd worked with enough to recognize the posture instantly. He looked back at the girl. "That's a good dog you've got. There," he said carefully. "What's his name?" The girl swallowed hard, her breath coming out in shaky clouds. "Duke," she murmured. My dad's dog." Her dad's dog, not hers, not a pet. Something inside Daniel tightened. He pointed gently to the sign hanging from Duke's neck. "Did you make that?" She nodded once. "And you're selling him for $5? Her eyes filled again as she looked down at Duke, stroking his head with trembling fingers. Then she whispered the words that pierced Daniel's heart. "Sir, can you please buy him?" For a moment, Daniel forgot about the cold, forgot about the snow, forgot about everything, because the way the little girl said those words felt like someone had pressed a hand straight into his chest and squeezed. He studied her face, searching for any sign that this was a misunderstanding, a joke, a child's confused idea. But her eyes told the truth. This was desperation. "Sweetheart." Daniel spoke softly, choosing his words with care. "Why would you want to sell Duke? He looks like he means the world to you." The girl lowered her gaze, her lashes trembling under melting snowflakes. I have to," she whispered. "We need money. My dad, he's sick, really sick." Daniel's breath slowed. He had dealt with homelessness, with families on the edge, with veterans carrying wounds no one could see. But there was something different about this child, like she'd been forced to grow up overnight, shoved into decisions that would break an adult, let alone a child. "How old are you?" Daniel asked. 9, she murmured. 9. 9 years old, sitting in the snow, begging a stranger to buy her father's retired police dog. Duke leaned his head into her arm, licking the back of her hand as if reminding her he was still there. Still loyal, still hers. She clutched him tighter, burying her face in his fur for a moment as her small shoulders shook. Daniel waited, giving her space. When she lifted her head, her voice cracked in a way that nearly undid him. "My dad says Duke is brave. He says Duke saved his life." She took a shaky breath. "But we can't afford food, or heat, or anything. Dad doesn't want me to know how bad it is. But I do." Her fingers tightened on Duke's collar. "So I thought, if I sold Duke, maybe someone else could take care of him. Somewhere warm, somewhere safe, and and maybe I could use the money to buy Dad's medicine." Daniel felt the world around them fall silent. This wasn't a child making a choice. This was a child sacrificing the only thing she had left. He swallowed hard, fighting the heaviness rising in his chest. "Did your dad tell you to do this?" She shook her head quickly. "No, sir. He doesn't know. He'd never let me. That's why I came out early, before he woke up." Duke pressed closer to her again, sensing her distress. The girl brushed her palm over his head, whispering as if to him rather than Daniel. "I'm not selling him because I want to. I'm selling him because I love him." Daniel exhaled slowly. There was no training in the world that prepared an officer for a moment like this. A little girl willing to break her own heart to save her father. "Emily," Daniel said gently, finally learning her name, "look at me." She lifted her tear-filled eyes. "I'm not walking away. Not from you, not from Duke, and not from your dad." Daniel took a slow breath, the cold air stinging his lungs, and moved a little closer. Not enough to frighten Duke, but enough to offer the girl warmth with his presence. Snowflakes landed in her hair, melting into tiny droplets that slid down her cheeks, mixing with her tears. She wiped them with the back of her hand, though her fingers were already numb. "Emily," Daniel repeated gently, letting her name settle between them. "Can you tell me about your dad? What happened to him?" She hesitated, biting her lip hard as if debating whether she should trust him. Duke gave a soft nudge to her arm, as if encouraging her to speak. Finally, she exhaled and looked up. "He was a police officer," she whispered. "A K-9 officer. Duke was his partner for 7 years. 7 years. Daniel felt his heart tighten. That wasn't just a working relationship. That was family. "He said Duke saved his life twice," Emily continued, stroking the dog's ear with trembling fingers. "The first time was when a man tried to attack him with a knife. Duke jumped in the way. Dad said he never even saw it coming." Duke lifted his head proudly at the sound of his name, ears flicking in recognition. His presence radiated quiet strength, the kind only a veteran working dog possessed. "And the second time?" Daniel asked softly. Emily's breath quivered. "A fire, a warehouse explosion. Dad got trapped under a fallen beam. Duke dragged him out, even when he was burned." Daniel swallowed hard. Stories like that weren't rare in the K-9 unit, but hearing them come from a child, whose voice trembled with pride and sorrow at the same time, hit differently. "What happened after that?" he asked. "They retired Duke," Emily said. "Dad couldn't go back to work. His lungs got damaged. He got sick. Really sick." Her shoulders slumped. "At first, we were okay. Dad said we'd figure things out. He tried so hard. But his medicine is expensive, and when he couldn't pay the bills anymore, they cut off our heat." Daniel closed his eyes for a moment. The icy wind biting his face felt insignificant compared to the cold this child had been living with. "When did things get this bad?" he asked quietly. Emily looked down at her boots, thin, wet, and cracked at the seams. "A few months ago, but Dad kept saying we'd be okay soon, that something would get better." Her voice trembled dangerously. "But nothing got better." Duke whimpered softly and leaned his head against her small shoulder. Emily hugged him tightly, burying her face in his fur. "He's all I have left," she whispered. "But Dad needs medicine, and I don't have any money. I thought if someone bought Duke, if someone could take care of him, then maybe Dad would stop getting worse." Daniel felt the weight of her words settle like snow on his shoulders. Cold, suffocating, impossible to ignore. Emily lifted her face again, eyes red and pleading. "I don't want to lose Dad," she cried softly. "And I don't want Duke to freeze or starve. I didn't know what else to do." In that moment, Daniel realized this wasn't just a sad situation. It was an emergency. A family hanging by a thread. and that thread was about to snap. Daniel had faced countless difficult situations in his years on the force, crime scenes, missing children, grieving families, but nothing hit him like this tiny girl sitting in the snow, offering up the only loyal companion her father had left. Emily's breath fogged in front of her with every trembling exhale, while Duke sat like a silent guardian, watching Daniel with intelligent, assessing eyes. For a moment, Daniel felt something he rarely allowed himself to feel on duty: helplessness. He knew protocol. He knew the limits of his authority. Officers weren't supposed to intervene in personal financial issues unless there was immediate danger. They weren't supposed to cross lines that blurred professional boundaries. They weren't supposed to get emotionally tangled in the lives of strangers. But how could he stand here and pretend this wasn't life-threatening? A 9-year-old child sitting in freezing temperatures. A retired K-9 who had saved lives being put up for sale because starvation and cold were knocking at their door. A father, somewhere in a dark, unheated home, too sick to fight anymore. Daniel exhaled, watching the steam fade into the icy air. "Emily," he began carefully, "you shouldn't be out here alone. It's dangerous and it's too cold for you to be outside this long." His tone was gentle but firm, the way he spoke when calming victims during tough calls. Emily brushed snow from Duke's fur, her fingers stiff and purple. "I know," she whispered, "but if I didn't come now, I was afraid Duke might not make it through tonight." Duke shifted, sensing her worry. He leaned his head into her shoulder, giving a soft rumble of comfort. It was an instinctive gesture of reassurance, one Daniel recognized from countless K-9s he had worked alongside. This dog knew her pain. He felt it. Daniel's jaw tightened. He couldn't ignore this, but he also couldn't simply tell her he would fix it. Life didn't work that way. Not with medical debt, not with failing health, not with freezing nights and empty cupboards. Help on paper took weeks, sometimes months, and Emily needed help now. The conflict inside him twisted deeper. The responsible officer in him said, "Follow the rules." The human in him said, "Save this child." He looked at Emily, seeing the courage it took for her to do something so heartbreaking. Then he looked at Duke, whose loyalty radiated from every muscle. Finally, he took a breath and made a silent decision, one that crossed protocol, boundaries, and logic. He wasn't walking away. Not today. Not from them. Daniel sat down fully in the snow, not caring about the cold seeping through his uniform. He needed to be at her level. Grounded, present, human. Emily hugged her knees, trying to hide how badly she was shivering, but Daniel could see it. Even Duke pressed closer, trying to warm her with his body heat. "Emily," he said softly, "I want to help you, but I need you to tell me everything. Not just some of it. All of it. Can you do that for me?" Her eyes darted away. Duke shifted uncomfortably, sensing her hesitation. His ears flicked back, then forward again. He nudged her arm with his nose, a quiet push of encouragement. Emily took a shaky breath. "There's something I didn't tell you," she whispered. Daniel waited patiently. She looked around, as if afraid someone might overhear. "If I tell you, you can't tell my dad. Promise?" Daniel felt that familiar tug, the one that came when a child placed their trust in him. "I promise I won't do anything to hurt him," he said honestly. "Or you." She nodded, though her eyes glistened with fear. "My dad doesn't know we're out of food," she began. "He thinks I still eat at school. He thinks our neighbors bring us groceries sometimes." Her voice cracked. "But they moved away months ago." Daniel's stomach tightened. "So, how have you been eating?" he asked quietly. Emily picked at the frayed thread on her sleeve. "I stopped eating dinner so Dad could have more." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "I drink water when I'm hungry." Daniel felt a flash of heat rise in his chest, a mix of sorrow and anger at the impossible weight this child was carrying. "And Duke?" he asked, though he dreaded the answer. Her lower lip trembled. I gave him most of my food." She wiped her eyes with the corner of her coat. "He kept bringing it back to me, but I hid it under my pillow until he ate it." Daniel swallowed hard, his throat tight. This girl wasn't just sacrificing her comfort, she was sacrificing her health, her safety, her childhood, all for a father she refused to burden, and a dog she refused to abandon. "Why didn't you ask for help, Emily?" he asked gently. She looked up at him with eyes full of old pain, far too old for someone her age. "Because Dad said he doesn't want anyone knowing we're struggling. He said it makes him feel like he failed." Tears spilled freely now. "I didn't want him to feel worse, so I tried to be strong." Daniel pressed a hand against, his forehead overwhelmed. A child shouldn't have to choose silence over survival. She shouldn't have to protect her parent from the truth. "And this morning," he said slowly, "you decided to sell Duke?" Emily's breath hitched. "Last night the house was so cold that Duke's teeth were chattering. I put my jacket on him. I stayed awake all night watching him shake. I thought, if he stays with us, he might die." Her voice broke. "And if Dad sees that, it'll break him. I can't let that happen." Daniel felt his chest ache. This wasn't desperation anymore. This was love. Raw, heartbreaking love. He looked at Duke, then back at Emily, and a silent vow formed inside him. He was going to help them. He had to. Daniel rose slowly from the snow, brushing the frost from his knees. The decision was already made. There was no scenario where he could leave Emily and Duke out here, not after everything she had confessed, not after seeing the toll it had taken on her tiny, exhausted body. "Emily," he said gently, "I need to take you home. I need to see your dad. Is that okay?" She hesitated, hugging Duke tightly. The dog nudged his head against her side, urging her forward. After a long moment, she nodded. Daniel offered her his hand. She slipped her small frozen fingers into his, and together they began walking down the snow-covered street. Duke followed closely, his paws crunching through the ice, never once letting Emily drift farther than a few inches from his side. As they walked, the houses grew older, more worn. Most were dark inside, their windows coated with frost. When they turned into a narrow side street, Daniel felt the temperature drop even further, as if the cold had found its home here long before winter arrived. Emily stopped in front of a small crumbling house with peeling paint and a sagging porch. A thin sheet of smoke drifted weakly from the chimney, barely enough to suggest heat. "This is us," she whispered. Daniel's heart sank. He'd seen abandoned houses with more life than this. The steps groaned as Emily climbed them, Duke pressing his shoulder firmly against her leg as if guiding her. She unlocked the door with a shaky hand. As it creaked open, a wave of icy air spilled out into the street. It was colder inside than outside. Daniel stepped in and immediately understood the gravity of their struggle. The living room was dim, lit only by a single lamp struggling to stay alive. Blankets were stacked in piles near the couch. A small space heater sat silently in the corner, unplugged, broken, or long dead. And on the couch, wrapped in layers of thin blankets, lay a man. Emily rushed forward. "Daddy!" The man stirred weakly, lifting his head just enough to see her. His face was pale, hollow, eyes sunken with exhaustion. Breathing seemed difficult for him. Every inhale a rattling fight. He tried to sit up when he saw Daniel, but his body failed him. "I'm Officer Hayes," Daniel said softly. "I found Emily outside. She was freezing." The man's jaw tightened in shame. I told her not to go out," he rasped. She shouldn't have." He looked at Emily with a mixture of love and helplessness that hit Daniel like a punch. "I'm fine. Emily whispered, kneeling beside him. "I just wanted to help." Duke rested his head on the man's knee, letting out a low whine. The man's trembling fingers stroked his fur, a gesture practiced through years of partnership. Daniel watched them, and a single truth settled across his heart. This wasn't a family living on the edge. This was a family hanging on by a thread so thin it was already starting to fray. The man's hand trembled as it rested on Duke's head, his fingers weak but still filled with the familiar affection of a handler who had trusted this dog with his life. Duke pressed closer, licking the man's knuckles softly, as if trying to remind him he was still there, still loyal, still guarding him even in retirement. Daniel stepped further inside, letting his eyes adjust to the dimness. The cold inside the house wasn't the gentle sting of winter. It was the kind that seeped into bone, the kind that came from months without sufficient heat. The air felt heavy, as though silence had taken root in every corner. Emily knelt beside her father. "Daddy, you should lie back. You're not supposed to sit up too fast." He gave her a faint smile. "I'm all right, sweetheart." But the rasp in his voice made the truth painfully clear. Daniel approached slowly. "Sir, I don't want to intrude, but Emily told me a little about what's been going on." The man's eyes flickered with shame. "She told you too much," he whispered. "She told me just enough," Daniel replied softly. The man leaned back, exhausted by even that small conversation. His breathing was shallow, labored, every inhale followed by a tight wince as though the air itself caused him pain. Duke's ears lowered in concern, and he gently nudged the man's arm. "His lungs," Emily murmured, her tiny voice filled with worry far too heavy for her age. "The doctors said they're hurt." Daniel glanced at the man, who nodded weakly. "It happened on my last call," he said. "Smoke inhalation. A warehouse explosion. Duke dragged me out through the flames." He paused, closing his eyes briefly as though reliving the moment. "The doctors said I should have died in there." Duke let out a low huff, settling protectively at the man's feet. "When they retired him," the man continued, "I promised I'd give him the peaceful life he deserved. No more danger, no more commands. Just comfort." His gaze drifted toward the peeling walls, the broken heater, the pile of blankets that served as bedding. Daniel swallowed hard. "You're a hero," he said gently. "But heroes need help, too." The man shook his head, his pride, battling his illness. "I can't be a charity case. I won't have my daughter begging on the street because of me." A quiet whimper came from beside him. Emily. She kept her head bowed, shoulders shaking as she tried to hold in her tears. "I didn't beg," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I just wanted to help." The man's eyes softened with devastation. "Emily." She burst into tears, throwing her arms around him. "I don't want you to die. I don't want Duke to freeze. I don't want to lose everything." Duke immediately stood, placing his paws gently on the couch beside her, his head nudging against her arm. It was the same instinct Duke had shown on duty: protect the vulnerable, comfort the wounded, stand guard over the broken. The man's shaky hand stroked her hair. "Sweetheart, I'm sorry. I tried. I really tried." Daniel felt something inside him snap, an overwhelming urge to step in, to lift this crushing weight off their shoulders. This man had once run toward danger, into fire, into violence, so others wouldn't have to, and now he was drowning alone. "Sir," Daniel said quietly, taking a step forward, "you didn't fail. You're sick. That's not failure. That's life-hitting in a way none of us can prepare for." The man looked away, jaw tightening. But Duke, ever loyal, ever watchful, turned his gaze toward Daniel as if silently asking, "Will you help? Will you do what we can't?" Daniel exhaled slowly. Duke had already saved this man's life twice. Maybe now. It was Daniel's turn. Daniel stood in the center of the dim living room, his breath visible in the freezing air, his heart heavy from everything he had just witnessed. Emily's sobs were soft but gut-wrenching, the kind of sound a child should never have to make. Duke stayed pressed against her, his tail still, his posture alert, watching over her with the fierce devotion only a K-9 partner could understand. The father leaned back against the couch cushions, each breath a struggle. Seeing Emily break like this seemed to hurt him more than his own lungs ever could. "Officer," he rasped, barely able to lift his eyes toward Daniel. "Please, don't blame her. She's just a kid trying to survive. She shouldn't have to, but she does." Daniel swallowed hard. "She shouldn't have to survive anything," he said firmly, his voice low but unwavering. "Not like this, not alone, not in the cold." Silence settled between them, broken only by the faint hum of wind slipping through the old window frames. Then Daniel stepped closer, lowering himself onto one knee so he was eye level with both father and daughter. "Listen to me," he began quietly, his tone steady with resolve. "You're not alone anymore. Not you, not Emily, not Duke." The father blinked, exhaustion clouding his eyes. "What? What are you saying?" Daniel took a breath, feeling the weight of the promise forming inside him. A promise that broke every boundary of a simple police call. "I'm going to help you," he said. "All of you. I don't care what it takes. You've given everything to protect this city. Duke has risked his life more times than anyone will ever know. Now it's time someone protects you." Emily lifted her head, her tears freezing on her cheeks. You mean it?" she whispered, voice fragile. Daniel reached out his hand and gently squeezed hers. "I mean every word." Duke's ears perked up as if he understood the shift in the room, the moment when despair began to ease, just enough for hope to slip in. The father shook his head weakly, overwhelmed. "Officer, I don't want to burden you. I'm not looking for charity." "This isn't charity," Daniel said softly but firmly. "It's humanity." Emily threw her arms around Daniel without warning, clinging to him with all the strength she had left. Duke rose, stepping forward to rest his head against Daniel's arm, sealing the moment like a silent witness. Daniel hugged Emily gently, feeling her small body tremble in his arms. "I won't let anything happen to your family," he whispered. "That's a promise." And in that cold, broken home, surrounded by peeling walls, silent rooms, and a loyal dog guarding what little they had left, something powerful sparked to life. Hope. For the first time since entering the freezing house, Daniel felt a small flicker of warmth, born not from heat, but from the fragile trust Emily and her father had placed in him. But as he pulled out his phone and began making calls, that warmth quickly dimmed. Some problems, he realized, weren't solved by compassion alone. "Emergency housing?" Daniel said into the phone, pacing the small living room. "A sick veteran and his 9-year-old daughter. No, they can't wait weeks. They need help tonight." He listened to the response, tightening his jaw. "They're full," he repeated. "Every shelter?" Emily watched him with wide eyes, trying to interpret his expressions. Duke hovered beside her, tail low, sensing tension. Daniel ended the call and immediately dialed another number. "What about medical assistance? He's barely breathing. He needs an oxygen machine, medication, anything." More excuses, more delays, paperwork, waiting lists, no funding, no openings. He tried veterans programs next. He served the city for years. He saved lives. He has a retired K-9 partner. Isn't there anything you can do? His voice carried the edge of desperation he rarely allowed himself to show. But the answers were the same. "We're sorry, Officer Hayes, but our program is backlogged. He'll need to apply formally. There's a 10-12 week wait. Try social services." He did, and social services told him to try everything he had already tried. Every call felt like pushing on a locked door, knowing a child stood crying behind. Him, waiting for it to open. Emily clutched Duke's fur as Daniel made call after call. Is anyone helping?" she whispered. Daniel forced a reassuring smile he didn't feel. "I'm trying, sweetheart." But inside, frustration twisted like a knot. He dialed the local health clinic. "Is there anything you can give him tonight? An emergency prescription? A nurse visit? Even a heater? He can't stay in these conditions." They apologized and redirected him to another department. The cycle repeated. Every agency, program, charity, each one offered sympathy, but not solutions. The father lay on the couch watching Daniel with tired, resigned eyes. "Officer, it's okay," he murmured weakly. "They've said the same to me for months." Daniel stopped pacing. "You've been asking for help?" Daniel asked. The man nodded faintly. "Before my voice got this bad. Before I couldn't walk far. But everything needed paperwork. Appointments I missed because I couldn't breathe. Phone calls I couldn't make. I gave up." Emily's face crumpled. "Daddy." The father forced a smile, brushing her cheek with trembling fingers. "It wasn't your fault, sweetheart, or Duke's. I just got tired." Daniel felt something inside him snap. Not anger, not shock. Resolve. He knelt beside the father again. "Sir, look at me." The man lifted his eyes, glazed with exhaustion. "I asked the whole system for help tonight," Daniel said quietly. "But the system failed you." He glanced at Emily, then Duke, then back at the father. "But I won't." Emily's breath caught. Duke lifted his head, ears alert. "I don't care what paperwork it takes," Daniel continued, voice low but unshakable. "I don't care how many calls I have to make. I'm not letting this family freeze or fall apart." The father blinked, stunned by the conviction in Daniel's voice, because in that moment he realized something. Help was coming. Not from the system, but from the man who cared. Night settled over the small house like a heavy blanket, pressing the cold even deeper into the walls. Daniel stayed long after his shift should have ended, helping Emily warm water on the stove, checking the father's pulse every hour, and doing everything he could to keep the house livable for one more night. The heater barely worked, coughing out a weak whisper of warmth before falling silent again. Emily sat on the floor beside the couch, wrapped in two thin blankets. Duke lay next to her with his big body curled protectively around her legs. His eyes never closed fully, opening every few seconds as if he expected something to go wrong. Daniel noticed it. "You okay, boy?" he whispered. Duke's ears pricked up. He looked at Daniel, then at his handler on the couch, then back at the hallway. Something had caught his attention, something Daniel couldn't hear or see. The father, exhausted from pain and cold, drifted, in and out of sleep. Every breath he took rattled through his chest like broken glass. Daniel watched him closely, noting the shallow rise and fall, the bluish tint forming around his lips. Emily leaned against Duke, stroking his fur to keep herself calm. "Daddy will be okay," she murmured, as if saying it aloud might make it true. And then Duke froze. His entire body stiffened. His ears shot forward. A low, deep rumble vibrated from his throat. "Duke?" Emily whispered, sitting up. Daniel immediately moved closer. The dog stood slowly, every muscle alert, eyes fixed on the father. He stepped forward, sniffed the air round the couch, then let out a sudden, sharp bark, one filled with urgency, not aggression. Daniel's blood turned cold. Is he having trouble breathing again? Daniel rushed to the father's side. The man's chest rose once, but barely. Each inhale was a fight. His fingers twitched weakly against the blanket. "Sir, can you hear me?" Daniel leaned over him. A faint sound escaped the man's lips. A wheeze, thin and fragile. His eyes fluttered open for a moment, unfocused, then rolled back. "Dad!" Emily cried, scrambling to her feet. "Daddy!" Duke barked again, louder, pushing his nose against the father's arm, trying to rouse him. Then he turned his sharp gaze toward Daniel, his message unmistakable. "Help him. Now." Daniel felt panic punch him in the chest. "Emily, grab your coat." She moved instantly, tears streaming down her face. Duke circled the couch, pacing, barking, nudging, doing everything a trained K-9 would do when sensing a medical emergency. His instincts were sharper than any alarm. Daniel checked the man's pulse. It was rapid, thready, slipping. "He's going into respiratory distress," Daniel muttered, grabbing his phone. "We don't have time." He dialed 911 with trembling fingers. "Medical emergency," he said urgently. "Unstable. Collapsing. Possible respiratory failure. I need an ambulance immediately." Emily clung to Duke, crying into his fur. Duke stood tall, unmoving, eyes locked on his handler as if refusing to let him go. Not again. Daniel placed a firm hand on Duke's side. "Good boy. You saved him. You saved him again." And in that freezing room, lit only by a flickering lamp, Duke stood like a guardian between life and death. A hero who knew something was wrong before any human could. The wail of the ambulance siren cut through the silent night like a lifeline. Daniel paced near the front door, peeking through the frosted window every few seconds, praying the EMTs would arrive in time. Behind him, Emily knelt beside the couch, gripping her father's hand with shaking fingers, whispering, "Please breathe, please breathe, please breathe." Duke stood guard, his body rigid, tail stiff, eyes locked on his collapsing handler. Every breath the man fought for, Duke felt it. His ears twitched with every shallow inhale, and his paws kept shifting, ready to act, ready to bark, ready to warn again if his partner slipped further. Finally, red and white lights flashed through the window. "They're here," Daniel called. The door burst open as two paramedics hurried inside, carrying equipment. The air in the house shifted instantly, from desperation to urgency. "What's his condition?" the lead medic asked, already kneeling beside the father. "Severe respiratory distress," Daniel said quickly. "His breaths are shallow. Pulse is weak and fast. He's been without proper heat, medication, or oxygen support." Emily stepped back as they worked, tears streaking down her small face. Duke didn't move. He stayed inches away, watching every motion. The medic fitted an oxygen mask quickly. The father's chest rose slightly, then faltered. "We need to move him, now," the medic said to his partner. "Load and go." They lifted him onto the stretcher. Emily let out a terrified cry. "Wait! Please, please don't leave us!" Daniel immediately stepped in front of her and knelt. "Emily, you're coming with him. I'm going with you." She threw her arms around him, sobbing into his shoulder. Duke pressed his head into her side protectively, whining. They hurried out of the house behind the stretcher. Snow fell harder now, the wind sharper, as if the world itself understood the stakes. Inside the ambulance, the space was tight. The father lay hooked to monitors, oxygen, and an IV. Emily sat beside him, clutching his cold hand. Daniel sat across, trying to steady the tremor in his own chest. Duke wasn't allowed inside the ambulance, but he refused to be left behind. The moment the doors shut, he sprinted alongside the vehicle, barking, jumping, refusing to let the ambulance disappear without him. "Duke!" Emily cried through the window. "Don't worry," Daniel said. "He'll follow us. He won't leave your dad." And he didn't. The ambulance accelerated through snowy streets, and Duke ran with a determination born from years of service. Paws pounding, breath fogging the air, refusing to slow down. Every streetlight revealed him still behind them, still fighting to keep up. Inside, the father's chest suddenly heaved. The monitor spiked. The medic pressed his stethoscope to the man's chest, frowning deeply. "He's worse than I thought," the medic muttered. "His lungs are collapsing under the pressure. He should have been hospitalized months ago." Emily's grip tightened on Daniel's sleeve. "Is he dying?" she whispered, voice trembling. Daniel shook his head quickly. No. Look at me. No. We're getting him help. Duke found the danger in time. You called for help. We're not losing him tonight. The medic looked up, meeting Daniel's eyes with a silent, grim truth. They were close. Too close. But not too late. The ambulance skidded into the hospital bay. Doctors rushed out taking the stretcher, straight into the ER. Daniel carried Emily inside as Duke, exhausted and shivering, ran up and pushed his head into her arm. Inside the brightly lit hospital corridor, warm, overwhelming, terrifying, Emily whispered the only words she could manage. "Daddy, please don't leave me." And Duke sat beside her, chest rising and falling, eyes fixed on the ER doors. Waiting, watching, guarding. His third rescue had just begun. The hospital hallway felt painfully bright after the dim, freezing house. Emily sat on a plastic chair, legs pulled to her chest, Duke curled protectively around her feet like a furry shield. Every few seconds, she lifted her head to stare at the red emergency surgery sign above the doors, eyes pleading for it to change, to show any sign of hope. Daniel stood nearby, hands clenched at his sides. He had seen emergencies. He had seen tragedies. But something about this family, broken, proud, silently suffering, had carved itself into him in a way he hadn't expected. He couldn't shake the image of Emily sitting in the snow with a cardboard sign, or the father, pale and gasping, apologizing for being sick. A doctor finally pushed through the doors. Emily shot to her feet, clinging to Duke's collar. Her breath hitched in her throat. "How is he?" Daniel asked, stepping closer. The doctor looked tired but not defeated. "He's stable for now," he said, "but only because you got him here when you did." An hour later, he didn't finish. Emily swallowed hard. Can I see him?" "Not yet, sweetheart," the doctor said gently. "He's still being monitored." Emily pressed her face into Duke's fur, muffling a sob. Duke whined softly and wrapped his body around her legs, trying to steady her trembling. Daniel felt something shift inside him. He couldn't let this child go back to that freezing house. He couldn't let her shoulder this alone. And he couldn't let her father worry about bills while fighting to breathe. "Doctor," Daniel said quietly, "what's the cost of tonight's treatment? And the oxygen? And the emergency care?" The doctor hesitated. "It'll be significant, but we'll try to connect him to programs." "Programs that take weeks," Daniel cut in gently. "He doesn't have weeks." The doctor nodded, acknowledging the truth. Daniel exhaled slowly. "Put it under my name," he said. Emily's head shot up. What? Daniel crouched beside her. "Your dad needs help now. You need a warm place tonight. I'm not letting you go back to that cold house." Tears spilled down Emily's cheeks. "Officer Hayes, no, you can't." "Hey," Daniel said softly, brushing a tear from her cheek. "Heroes deserve help, too. Your dad spent years saving lives. Duke saved his, and you've been trying to save everyone." His voice cracked slightly. "Let someone save you for once." Duke stepped forward and pressed his head against Daniel's chest, a deep rumble vibrating through him, as if he understood, as if he approved. Daniel placed a hand on Duke's neck. "You're a good dog," he whispered. "But tonight, you don't have to carry everything alone." Emily wrapped her arms around Daniel, hugging him tightly, her small body shaking with relief and exhaustion. "You saved my dad," she cried, "just like Duke did." Daniel closed his eyes for a moment, overwhelmed by the weight of her words. He wasn't her father. He wasn't even a friend until today. But tonight, he had become the one thing she desperately needed. Someone who wouldn't give up on them. Morning sunlight slowly crept through the hospital windows, painting soft gold across the waiting room floor. Emily had fallen asleep, curled against Duke, her cheek resting on his thick fur, her small hands gripping his collar even in sleep. afraid, perhaps, that letting go would make everything disappear. Daniel sat beside them, exhausted but unable to rest. He'd spent most of the night making arrangements, calling contacts, pulling every string he could reach. He wasn't a wealthy man, not by any means, but he had enough to give this family the chance they'd been denied for too long. Around 9 a.m., the doctor emerged again. Emily jolted awake. Duke lifted his head, ears sharp. The doctor offered a tired but genuine smile. "He's awake, still weak but stable. He's asking for both of you." Emily darted forward with Duke at her heels. Daniel followed quietly, giving them space. When they entered the recovery room, the father lay connected to monitors, pale but alive, fighting, breathing, surviving. "Daddy!" Emily cried, rushing to his bedside. He opened his eyes, and though they were faint, they carried a spark that hadn't been there the night before. "Hey, sweetheart," he whispered, brushing her cheek with trembling fingers. Duke placed his front paws gently against the bed, lowering his head so the man could touch him. Tears slipped down the father's temples as he stroked Duke's fur. "You saved me again, buddy," he whispered. "You always do." Emily climbed carefully onto the bed, curling against her father's side. Duke rested beside her, half on the bed, half off, just making sure his pack was whole again. Daniel stood near the doorway, giving them privacy. But the father called out, "Officer Hayes." Daniel stepped closer. "Yes, sir?" The father swallowed, voice raw. I don't know how to thank you. You did more for us in one night than anyone has in months." Daniel shook his head. "You didn't deserve to go through that alone." The father glared at the blankets, shame flickering across his face. "I should have protected Emily. I should have been stronger." Emily grabbed his hand. "You are strong, Daddy. Duke told you something was wrong, and Officer Hayes, he helped us. You don't have to do everything alone anymore." The father's eyes glossed as he looked between his daughter, his dog, and the officer who refused to walk away. Daniel cleared his throat. "Listen, the community is stepping in." He pulled a folded paper from his pocket. "After I explained what happened without using your name, a fundraiser started overnight." The father's eyes widened. "A fundraiser?" "Yes. People want to help you. Veterans groups, K-9 associations, neighbors you've never met. They're covering your medical bills. There's already enough to fix your heater, and more coming." Emily gasped. "Daddy, see, things are getting better," Duke barked once as if agreeing. The father looked down, overwhelmed. Why would people help us?" Daniel smiled softly. "Because you served them. You saved lives. You raised a brave little girl, and you gave Duke a home full of love." Emily hugged her dad tighter. Duke licked his hand. For the first time in months, hope filled the room. Real hope. Warm, steady, life-changing. A new beginning had finally arrived. 2 weeks later, winter still clung to the ground, but inside the newly repaired home, warmth finally filled the air. The heater hummed steadily, the windows were sealed, and light streamed through freshly cleaned glass. For the first time in months, the house felt alive. Emily sat cross-legged on the living room rug, drawing pictures with Duke lying lazily beside her. His fur gleamed now, no longer dull from hunger and cold. Every so often he nudged her crayons with his nose, making her giggle softly. Her father, still weak but far stronger than before, sat in an armchair near the window. A portable oxygen tank rested beside him, humming quietly. He watched the scene with a look Daniel had never seen on his face before. Peace. And Daniel, now a regular visitor, stood in the doorway, taking in the sight. He had brought groceries, blankets, and a couple of toys for Emily. But what he felt wasn't obligation. It was connection. It was family. "You look better," Daniel said warmly, stepping inside. The father managed a small smile. I feel better. The doctor said I'm responding well to the treatment. I still have a long road, but at least I'm finally on it." Emily jumped up and ran to Daniel, hugging him tightly. "We baked muffins. Duke helped me," she announced proudly. Duke barked in agreement, tail wagging. Daniel chuckled. "I'd love one." As Emily rushed to the kitchen, Duke trotted behind her like a loyal shadow. The father's smile softened as he watched them. "Officer Hayes," he said quietly, "there's something I need to ask you." Daniel turned, meeting his eyes. The father's voice trembled, not from weakness but from emotion. "You've done more for us than I could ever repay. You treated us like family when the world turned away." He looked down at Duke, who returned to his side and placed a gentle paw on his knee. "I wanted to offer you Duke," he said, "as a partner, as a friend. You deserve him. You've earned him. And you saved us." Daniel inhaled sharply. The officer in him felt honored, but the man in him knew the truth. He knelt beside Duke, scratching behind his ears. "You're a good boy," he whispered, "but your place is right here, with the people who love you." Duke leaned into the touch, then turned and nudged Emily's hand with his nose, as if confirming Daniel's words. Emily wrapped her arms around Duke's neck. "He's our family," she whispered, "and you are too." Daniel froze for a moment, stunned. "Family." The word settled inside him with unexpected warmth. The father swallowed hard. "If you ever need us, for anything, we're here. You didn't just save our lives." His voice cracked. "You saved our hope." Daniel looked at the three of them. The girl who had begged to sell her only companion, the father who had nearly lost everything, and the retired K-9 who refused to abandon his pack. He felt something shift deep within him. He hadn't just changed their lives, they had changed his. Emily reached into her pocket and handed him a folded piece of paper. "I made this for you," she said shyly. Daniel opened it, and his heart nearly burst. In crayon she had drawn himself, Emily, her father, and Duke, all standing together, smiling. At the top, in her messy handwriting, were the words, "You didn't buy Duke. You helped save our family." Daniel wiped a tear before it could fall. Some stories don't end with a goodbye. Some end with a beginning. And this was theirs.